Welcome back to the Batuta Advocate radio show. You're joined today by myself, Clancy Overall, and of course, Editor-at-Large Errol Parker. Now, last three podcasts have been rather alpha, rather macho. We've had, of course, Drew Mitchell from the Wallabies before he jumped on a plane to Japan. And after that, we had Dean Kemp, former NRL journeyman, Brisbane Broncos and football analyst. And last week, we had New South Wales Deputy Premier, leader of the Nationals, John Barilaro, the Rudy Giuliani of Australian politics. I think, Errol, it's time for us to lower the testosterone a little bit this week. Today's guests are two young media moguls, Zara and Michelle from Shameless Media. They run the Shameless podcast. They won Podcast of the Year last year. They kind of delve into the space of new media. I guess you'd describe them as a media watch for influencers and fashion and reality TV. They have a huge following across Australia. They've been so kind to join us this week to talk about the changing media landscape and how things are quite different for two young women in media who started their career writing clickbait articles, Mamma Mia and magazines like that. They've since found their own following, and you can do that in this day and age in independent media. So sit back and enjoy the podcast with the girls from Shameless. They are what you'd describe as Ellen DeGeneres if she was in her early 20s, not a lesbian, and two people. This is the Batuta Advocate radio show, recording live out of Baxter Booth studio. Let's get on with it. You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate on Desert Rock FM. Today, we're joined by the white millennial Oprahs from Shameless.
How long had you prepared that line for?
Just minutes before you walked in.
What a tagline. We should change the podcast for smart women who love dumb stuff to white millennial Oprahs.
Yeah, well, Joe
Seems
Rogan,
like a bit of a backhander.
Yeah, Joe Rogan sits as male Oprah, like men's Oprah.
As male white Oprah.
Male white Oprah, yeah. But you guys are kind of in that space. I mean, you don't give away cars and shit yet, but you're heading towards a pretty diehard fan base.
They are very passionate in a great way. It has really blown us away.
Zara and Michelle.
Yeah, it's like, who
How are
they?
you guys? Thank you for joining us. And you have a very staunch fan base.
Yeah, they're crazily invested, and I think that's the thing that surprised us the most since we actually got into this space, is how we accidentally tapped into a completely untapped market who were probably ignored for a very long time. And I think that's what it is.
Yeah, and probably entirely luck. Like Zara and I turn to each other all the time and say, why the fuck does anyone care this much, and why have people latched onto the Shameless brand so much? And it's probably just because no one else was speaking to this audience in an authentic way. And I hate the word authentic as well. It's so cliched. I'll probably take that back. That is very Oprah-esque of me. But I think it was just a gap in the market to be kind of analytical about it. We're not doing anything outrageously inspirational.
Or Oprah.
Yeah.
But it is just that open gap.
So you're kind of sitting between like Dolly Doctor and mummy blogging, and it was. I mean,
It's a backhanded compliments just keep going.
trying to figure out what this market is, because it's obviously millennial.
I feel like it's a young group of women between millennials and Gen Z. So it's also like not a generation either. It's like they're caught between two generations who, you're right, weren't kind of consuming magazines and Dolly Doctor, weren't quite consuming mummy blogs. There weren't a huge wealth of women's websites who were talking to them in a way that wasn't just serving them clickbait, and then they were just sort of like sitting idly, not consuming anything.
Yeah.
Well, it started with The Bachelor. And
It did.
I suppose for a lot of people around the country, they're not sure what the lure of The Bachelor is. What is The Bachelor to you?
Michelle.
What is The Bachelor to me? I think it's just a great way to look at what we value and how we see women. I think in particular, if you looked at this last season, there was one contestant who was just royally slut-shamed for the entire, however many episodes, 20 episodes or whatever it was. And yeah, it's stupid and it's funny, and that's half the reason we love talking about The Bachelor, to take the piss out of it. But the other side of it is to be like, okay, well, why is everyone judging this woman for rolling around on the beach in her bikini when she's doing that with a guy, and he doesn't seem to be getting any flack for that, despite the fact he's literally got 20 girlfriends at once. So I just think it's a good way to kind of look at what we value and what we don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's still like frivolous manufactured entertainment. But I do think it's something that we've always felt like we can derive more meaning from than perhaps we even need to, but I still think it matters. Like hundreds of thousands of young women are sitting in front of this TV show for a reason. And I guess from our perspective, we've always wondered why there are millions, literally millions of sport commentary shows out there. Like you can spend hours talking about the cricket or analysing like one play in the AFL. And suddenly it was just so stupid to talk about a reality show that was demanding all of these eyeballs and all of this media attention. And for us, we thought that like genuinely does matter. And I think that's what it does mean to us. It can, yes, it's really stupid and maybe we derive more meaning from it than we need to. But I think we derive more meaning from a lot of things that we don't need to.
And in fact, as you said, that particular lane of kind of Triple M-esque sports panels is almost overcated for. Like, how far can you
Totally. Well, there's
stretch
entire.
that?
My boyfriend works for a radio station, and it's an entirely sport-dedicated radio station, and I love that because I love my sport as well. But this was a very underserviced area, and given the popularity of those kind of shows, like Married at First Sight gets almost 2 million viewers a night. There's popularity there. I know that not every sport game gets 2 million viewers or eyeballs on it, so. It was basic maths to us, I think. And it wasn't even as if we came up with the idea for the Batch Recap podcast, but when we were presented with the opportunity to host it, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, and we were kind of just given a studio and a couple of microphones after hours and started just like talking shit about The Bachelor. And we probably took it far more seriously than anyone intended for us. Like, the things that we tried to Trojan horse people in that podcast, like we were talking about The Bachelor and we would try to talk about racism and sexism and what else, like diversity on television.
Yeah, queer baiting.
Yeah, all of those kinds of things, which essentially is what Shameless tries to do on a much bigger platform.
Yeah, it's not just The Bachelor anymore. You talk about everything and anything. What other kind of chasms, cultural chasms, have you discovered? I mean, obviously, underserviced was reality TV dating shows, but you speak about all kinds of stuff.
I think the influencer industry, and I think that can sound really stupid when you say it out loud, but I think that there was this entire industry that existed on social media where young people were making huge amounts of money off huge followings and nobody was holding them to account. Like nobody was taking it seriously as a job, so nobody was taking any of the things they said very seriously. And for us, we always found it quite troubling, particularly with the line of thought with like medical misinformation or stuff like that was just being purported on social media everywhere. And there was no watchdog.
Yeah.
Like no watchdog at all.
Like the prominent rugby league wives who run anti-vaxxer seminars.
Exactly. And everyone, and they are laughable. And that's the thing. It's so laughable, but there are so many women and men out there who take that shit really seriously. And I don't understand why, but I guess that's kind of irrelevant that some people literally don't think twice about it until you put it in their ears and go, this is fucked up. Yeah. And we should all see how fucked up it is. People don't even think about it some of the time, that you need to lay it out and do good research and present them the argument until they actually listen.
Yeah, I think it's because it has never been like a traditional form of media, and also because people find Instagram and influencing a bit stupid. So nobody has taken that seriously, and therefore nobody takes the things that they say seriously. When in reality, you've got like millions of young kids consuming this stuff and taking it as gospel, and that to me really matters, and I think somebody needs to hold it to account. So that was just like this gaping hole that we accidentally stumbled upon, where we were suddenly in front of a microphone accidentally like slamming every influencer under the sun.
Particularly about like women's health issues. A very interesting area because there's not a lot of education about it and there's not a lot of discussion about it. So if you have an influencer who comes out and says, I healed my polycystic ovary syndrome by drinking green juice, some people will believe that. Like some women will be struggling with PCOS and think, well, maybe this is what doctors aren't telling me. My doctor, my GP doesn't listen to me when I tell him my symptoms. Maybe this is what I need to do. Yeah. And if it worked for this girl, then it might work for me. And I think particularly when it comes to women's health issues, we've definitely found that influencers have the ears and the trust of everyone who follows them. And until someone actually lays out the science or goes to an expert or holds them to account, they're going to have that influence, and that's really dangerous.
Yeah, well, like there's the classic case of Belle Gibson. You know,
totally.
or at least
she won awards.
Yeah.
I think it was Cosmo, maybe don't quote me if it wasn't Cosmo, but it was some magazine that gave her Woman of the Year or Influencer of the Year. And she said that she was curing her brain cancer by eating healthily. So the fact that that could go through, that a major women's publication could go, yes, let's give her our award for the most inspirational use of Instagram in 2015 or whatever it was. And no one stopped to think, hang on, you actually can't cure brain cancer by eating celery all day every day.
Well, it took her to get convicted of taking other people's money for her to be, you know, effectively you know,
More than cancelled, yeah.
to be deplatformed, you know, but there's lots of other people who aren't taking money for what they're saying, you know. Would that just be, you know, that is their right to say what they believe?
Yeah, is it only an issue when you start taking money for these crazy ideas?
Not at all.
No.
I think it becomes an issue when you make money off your following in whichever way you see fit.
Yeah.
And I think if you accept money for your Instagram page, you're therefore accepting that you have some form of influence and you can therefore be defined as an influencer. And so if someone comes back to you and says, well, you can't say everything now, you can't possibly reject that and say, but I'm just telling my story because your story has like a huge impact because you are therefore defining yourself as an influencer because you've taken money for other things before.
It has ripple effects, obviously. Talk to anyone who's had someone in their family or themselves been diagnosed with cancer. They've all had that conversation with a nut job friend who's like, well, are you eating your greens?
Yeah, it's like, have you tried, what is it, CBD oil or whatever it's called?
Are you sleeping enough?
Drinking water.
Have you only tried drinking alkaline water for 2 weeks?
I saw a funny tweet the other day that Gwyneth Paltrow told everyone to drink alkaline water and then put lemon juice in it. And this doctor tweeted out being like, that literally makes it not alkaline anymore.
Yeah, she's having a glow up, Gwyneth.
Yeah.
Even the misinformation around health and pseudosciences, like that's still a pretty shallow world they're working in. Have you ever seen influencers, you know, maybe develop a following off their aesthetic or their, you know, their good looks, and then do something positive with it? Have you ever seen like a humanitarian?
God, you're
It's
really putting us
rare.
on the spot.
It's rare. I mean, I've definitely seen people stand for something they truly believe in, which is great. I think off the top of our head, like we've become close with some influencers in the industry. Not many, but there are definitely some where we've met through doing the podcast or whatever, and we've bonded over the fact that they're one of the few who does a really good thing with their platform that they have. And often, to be honest, it's something as simple as either diversity, making sure that there are different stories and faces and people that have a platform, but also like something as simple as telling people that you don't need to have a thigh gap and you don't need to be a size 6.
Which matters to a lot of young girls who are on that platform, just to see those messages. I mean, if we're talking about people doing good, I mean, I guess it depends on your definition of what doing good means. Like, I can't think of an influencer who's turned into a humanitarian who's like presenting at the UN. But I do think that there are influencers out there who aren't actively doing bad. And I don't think it's great that maybe that's where our baseline is, but I think that is the reality when you've got a platform that's literally based off aesthetics and people grow followings because of aesthetics.
Well, the problem is that the vast majority of products used in influencer marketing are designed to make women feel shit. So if the vast majority of products are teeth whitening and cellulite reducing creams,
scrub.
like all that type of shit, it's going to be really hard for an influencer to then be like doing good every single day because the products they're mostly pushing are pretty bad for women. But I think some with really big followings have been able to kind of say yes and no to the right deals at the right times and be able to put their weight behind things that actually matter.
We have been sent some goodies.
Yeah, we got a teeth whitening kit.
We get approached by
Wait, why
teeth
did
whitening
you guys
brands
get
like
teeth whitening?
every week.
No idea why.
I don't
No,
know.
the
Yeah.
perfect alignment.
I know, and we used it, and then you know,
What, you
a lot of
did?
the
Whoa,
a lot
whoa.
of like people with kind of in my life that have
We
brains
used it.
banned me from using
Yeah.
it because it
Whoa.
feels like it's not healthy.
Doesn't
You
it
put a
fuck your
gel-
teeth?
Was it the one with the gel? We got sent
Gel,
that.
yeah.
Hated it. They
Yeah.
messaged me to be like, do you want to do a sponsorship? And I was like, absolutely not.
It just doesn't feel like
Yeah.
it's good. Like I'm pretty sure I burnt my lip trying to use this.
Oh my
thing.
God, that's what I said. I'm like, I must have sensitive teeth because that stuff hurt. And then they just never responded to me.
Does it make your teeth really sensitive? That's what I keep hearing.
Yeah, well, we had to go in the newsroom and we thought that this isn't worth all the money in China. So we said, you know,
It's a lot of money.
we're going to have to pass.
Yeah.
How do you guys deal with kind of walking in that world of, you know, dissecting influencers,
But also
dissecting
kind of being influencers.
and kind of
So-
being that? Yeah.
We find it funny. I mean, it's interesting because you call yourself content makers, but a lot of influencers call themselves content makers too. And I think there's a lot of snobbery around content, particularly as two people who have come from journalism. I don't think all content is made equal. Like, I don't think that taking a photo is the same as making a podcast.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
might
for
be an
sure.
unpopular opinion for some people to hear that.
Yeah, I think the word influencing has been bastardized
Yeah.
for sure, in that I don't want to be called an influencer. I know lots of people in the industry who don't want to be called influencers, and I understand that because we
By
do
the
a-
industry, you mean media in general?
Yeah, kind of. But even people who used to be influencers who have then gone on to create businesses from it, they would then
Yeah.
call themselves business women, which I think is also probably fair. I think if you've capitalized off that audience to create something, then that's
Yeah.
quite clever and savvy, and it shouldn't just be put down to taking selfies.
Yeah. lady startups.
Yeah, which I hate. I hate the term when it's like female boss or like lady boss or female startups. Is like, can we just call it a startup? It's not a female
gender
startup.
disclaimer.
Yeah, weird, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because I think we kind of straddle both spheres. Even though I don't like the word influencer, we do have influence. And it's interesting. I mean, we're critiquing a system that we are partially part of. We have a decent Instagram following. We do Instagram content. But I think what we add is value. And I don't see many classic stereotypical influencers adding a lot of value in what they do. And I think the clear difference is that it's not so transactional. It's not like we give a photo and someone scrolls past it and likes it. We actually give people something that they can enjoy and that brightens their day and either educates, entertains, or empowers them. And that's the 3 E's that we always come back to try and make sure if we're doing that, then our content's on point. And if people want to call us influencers, that's fine. We know that we're probably content creators before that.
For someone who's like an iconic influencer in Australian market, someone like Tash Oakley, or anyone of that kind of level, how much money do you reckon you could make from a career?
More money than anyone would probably think.
Really?
I think
Even when people guess how much money I think the top influencers are making, they're so far off it still. Top influencers are making millions and millions a year.
Really?
Yes.
God.
It's more than what people think, 100%. And I know that people, the fascinating thing is that lots of people don't see where the dollars are actually coming from. The average person looks at advertising and looks at the media and looks at social media content and can't actually figure out
where the
how much money is coming in and where the money's coming in. So they might look at an event and be like, okay, cool. So maybe they got to go on this event for free, when really that person might have been paid $15,000 just to go to that event and post that photo. So I think once you realize how much a big audience is worth and you kind of add up how much brand deals are worth per 100,000 followers, it's insane amount of money.
I do think there'd be so much more resentment for influencers if people knew how much money was swirling in the industry.
Do you reckon it's more than $1 a follower?
Oh God, don't make me do this math.
Like for a yearly
Yeah.
salary? Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. It'd be...
Yeah. I mean, look, this is us just hedging right now.
Yeah.
We're so
But
poor.
yeah, we're such everyday blokes. But yeah, there is so much more money swirling than I think people realise. And I think if people did realise, like I said, there'd be a little bit more resentment, because there is that classic conversation about what is their job and do they work as many hours as the average person. I mean, I think it would depend on who you're talking to, but I think some would earn a lot of money and do half the work as a few other people.
And again, I probably have more respect for those who have done something with their following than just use it to take photos, which is fine if that's what you want to do, go for it. But I personally find myself gravitating towards other women who have kind of made something of it.
Like a bikini label or...
Yeah, well, literally anything. If you want to have a bikini company, that's up to you, like Tash Oakley doesn't?
Oh, no, I was thinking literally every other one, but...
There is if we're talking oversaturation, there's an oversaturation of bikini companies, but I mean, women wear bikinis.
Yeah.
And it still takes something to launch a bikini brand. So if that's what you want to do,
Yeah,
do
so
it.
you're saying almost just constructive.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
just think do something. Like, there's such an opportunity there. I kind of feel like I'm banging my head against a wall when I look at a girl who has, or woman, sorry, who has 1 million followers and isn't launching anything with that. Like, that is a captive audience that you could monetize. And I know that sounds very what's the word? A little bit pragmatic about it. But I think it's such a missed opportunity. Instagram won't be around forever. And if you don't leverage that audience to be something great, then you're probably going to need to start at the very bottom of the career chain again. Whereas if you capitalize off it now, maybe you never have to work again in your entire life.
What's the culture like? You know, I know that we've all sort of worked for newspapers online, and there is a certain onus on the fact that, you know, you need to prioritise the money first over the image, which was certainly the case at the newspaper that I used to work at before I moved here.
Name and shame? No?
Well, don't encourage that conversation.
China Daily.
Yeah. How is the model different now for you as opposed to what it was at your old job?
It's a really interesting question. I think Zara and I are in a good spot because we did Shameless before it was monetized. Like, we did this because we genuinely love the content that we put out. We love the topics that we cover. We did Shameless for free for almost a full year, and that was on top of a full-time job. So it wasn't like we went into this to make money.
Yeah.
So I think that was the best starting point ever, because money was never the first conversation that we had. And I know it's really important to us to make sure the content is good and the money will come, because if you flip it the other way around, I think it's really, really detrimental to your brand, because eventually listeners and readers are clever and they'll be able to see it if you're selling out, and they'll be able to see it if you put the money before the content, because the content starts to slip and then people start to go away.
Yeah, well, it's about playing a long game, not a short game. But I think for us, having jumped from maybe a more traditional digital media outlet to this one, or to this sort of like hybrid role we're in. We're sort of like half foot in the podcasting industry. We've got like half a foot in this influencing industry. Like we're really hybrid, and I think that works to our advantage because we don't have that desperation, I think, that a lot of traditional media brands have to make money, where they actually do have to come up with the dollars before they come up with the idea. And I think that's where a lot of traditional media are falling down, that they don't have the luxury that we have, which is like an overly earnest luxury to say, we need to have the idea before the money, because we are, to be brutally honest, we're like 25. We don't have huge overheads with our business. Like we can make those decisions now to say we need the idea first.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we'll lose our audience. And if we don't have our audience, we don't have jobs.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the companies which do have their back against the wall now, I think they've got probably too many mouths to feed.
I was going to say,
these companies,
we really, really want to stay small. We don't have huge ambitions, and maybe someone will play this back to me in 10 years' time and be like, what the fuck? Why do you have a 200-person company?
Whoa.
I don't want that. Like, I don't want a 100-person company. I don't want a 50-person company. I would love to say relatively small. Yeah, because I think, number one, we want everyone to be remunerated well who works for us. Like, we genuinely really want that, and if we can't provide people good pay and feel like they're being rewarded for what they bring, then I don't want to do it. Because I think I've been in a situation before where I feel like I've been
taken for a ride
and overworked and underpaid and resentful.
So there's no intern policy?
No.
And I'll put my hand up and say we tried an intern for like 2 minutes, and then we're like, we can't do this. Like, we remember exactly what it was like. But Michelle is right, like, and you guys are right. You don't want to get into a position where there's too many mouths to feed, because we've seen the industry change so dramatically that I don't think you can bank on anything. And I think we need to stay really agile and be able to pivot, because everything could fall apart. Like, I think so many digital media outlets were so beholden to algorithms and have really struggled since the Facebook and Instagram algorithm change, because they had these huge companies and jobs that they didn't know what to do with. Yeah.
That's terrifying as well, to think that so many people were so reliant on Facebook. And I know you guys were like some of the few who actually was stable throughout that. I know that.
Well, it really pays not to have all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Where in order to build something up, you need to really diversify
your
costs and
as someone who was on the inside as well, when we were working somewhere that was beholden to Facebook algorithms, it was stressful, very stressful when that started to plummet, because you don't know what else to do.
You start seeing people make concessions. You start seeing people make kind of compromises in their content and their voice.
And as an
quality
editor,
is not at the forefront. It's just not. When you're desperate for eyeballs, nobody cares about quality. You need to get the clicks because you need the money. And it comes back to that same idea. It's like money is the first goal. And I think when that happens, your entire business model can kind of fall apart.
Was there any moment where you were working for another company where you kind of published something where you were like, what is this?
Oh my God, yes.
All the time.
There was one.
Is there any standout moments?
Like, I'm sure if you Googled us, you'd pull up some stuff where you'd be like, what the fuck?
There'd be so many. But there was one time.
I'm nervous what you're going to say on mic.
You're going to die.
No, don't.
No. It's not too bad.
Okay.
There was one time when there was really high targets on us, and it was just Zara and I working, and it was a Saturday, and
this is so bad.
It got to the point where I had to go through like Reddit and be like, okay, where's a good story? And it was just like this,
like fully triggered from this.
No. It was just like some random sex story that we then turned into an article. But I remember putting it up, and as soon as the article went up, this stupid Reddit sex story that we like kind of repurposed and fleshed out, it was shit content. I remember sitting with Zara and being like, actually, could we pull that off the site? As soon as it went so well and I saw how many clicks I got on it, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I would have been 22 at the time. So I was 22.
Didn't write it. I had to have my byline.
You were writing. I would have been 22.
It was, I wish I could tell you what was the headline? I can't even say. It wouldn't even be appropriate.
It was the sign I knew my girlfriend was cheating on me.
Oh, that's a good one.
And it was like the most graphic story you could find on Reddit. Anyway, it was like.
And you literally, you just kind of your source is Reddit.
Yeah.
You say one user on Reddit wrote.
That's the thing. And I think
Exactly.
that's literally it. And do you know how much content has been repurposed from Reddit in your time? But it is one of those check yourself moments where you're like, what the fuck am I doing? Yeah. Like, I'm actually a stain on everything by pushing this content out. But you feel desperate in the moment.
And
You're
we were
young.
desperate. Like there were days when I would cry at my desk because I knew that the pressure was so high. And Zara and I, as two people,
We're 22.
had to get so many people on the website for it to be an okay day where I wouldn't get questions. So as the editor at that time, I literally was slumped over at my desk on multiple occasions crying because I didn't know how to do it and I didn't know how to pull a magic something. I don't know what the correct cliche is, pull something out of the bag where
rabbit?
we just pull it off. Pull a rabbit out of bag. But there would be stories from that time where absolutely I look back and I'm like, what the hell was I doing? But there was also stories when I was a junior writer and I just didn't say no when I really should have said no.
I should have said no to Michelle when she commissioned me that story, the sex story. But I think the other sense that you get in digital media that has changed a lot for us is this idea that worthy quality content doesn't get eyeballs. Yeah. And I think when you're like beholden to algorithms and clickbait always wins, we were taught from a really young age in the industry that, like, yes, you have to write 5 really clickbaity articles before you can write that one story that you really care about that's going to do good, because that story doesn't get any eyeballs. And then the minute we kind of changed the way we presented content and we started working in podcasting and we built an audience that way, we realized that the worthy content is actually the stuff that is like the most commercially successful.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There was one day that we did a shameless title where we put sex in it, because this would have been maybe episode 8 or 9. I remember being like, oh, this will go great because sex is in the title, and based on everything that we'd done in other media jobs, that had proven to be true, that if you write something...
You're trying to recondition yourself.
Yeah, it's like if you write something salacious and something clickbaity, people will click. And we realised with podcasting that is the total opposite. People will read that and be like, ew, clickbait. No, because podcast listeners are too clever for it.
Yeah, because it's such an investment, you know. Like if you're going to click on an article and it's rubbish, it's in and out. Where like if it's a podcast, it's 10 minutes of your life that you're not going to get back.
It's a different medium, and it's a different discoverability, because you can you're getting ready for the long haul. You're not here to, I just need to read this article about how you knew your girlfriend was cheating on you.
Yeah.
Does that heartbreak that you were just mentioning from working in traditional media kind of capacity, does the heartbreak come from you two having dreams of being on Four Corners, or what was the...
No.
No. You didn't feel like you were like betraying journalism.
No. We are like, do not get me wrong. We are not highbrow journalists by any, like, we loved lowbrow stuff. And I think the reason that we found ourselves in the line of work we're in now is because we didn't think lowbrow stuff got enough credit. I never had any dreams to be like a foreign correspondent by any stretch, because I just didn't feel smart enough or like gritty enough. I think it was just more that like overly earnest idea that if I'm going to put work into the world, I at least don't want it to do any bad. Like, I want it to do good. Like, I want to be having some positive impact. Like, I don't need to be saving the world. I don't need to be saving lives, but I want to do some sort of good. And that's the thing that I always came back to. And I think when you're putting stories like that kind of mean nothing, are helping no one, and as our old repurposed Reddit content, you're like, what am I actually doing?
Yeah, I don't want to waste people's time.
Yeah,
genuinely do not want to waste other people's time. And I want to think that if I'm being... it's not arrogant, but if I'm being confident enough to say that my words and my opinions are worthwhile of your time, I don't want to take the reader or listener for a ride, and I actually want to put effort into it. And I think when you're beholden to potentially unrealistic or impossible KPIs, then you kind of lose sight of that.
Lifestyle is a old media term for, interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So that in itself is kind of constructive, and it's where do you think that line got crossed? Do you think it was in tabloid world? Where do you think that kind of between public interest stuff and like gossip and full-blown shaming?
Yeah. I think tabloids probably have a lot to answer for, particularly because they were the ones that were able to like keep up circulation, and they were the ones that were able to get the clicks when everything else was falling apart. So I think probably that first and foremost has had a massive impact. I don't think it's going to be like that forever, though. I think we went through this, like, what's the opposite of a sweet spot? Sour spot.
Armageddon.
Yeah, Armageddon, where, like we keep saying, algorithms changed, digital media started struggling, and nobody kind of knew where to go, and nobody knew what to push out.
Where were you guys working? Were you full time on Shameless during the reckoning, or
No,
you saw it happen in the old world?
In the old world,
in the old
as it fell apart, and you could see
On the coalface,
you could
as a
see the
writer,
clicks just decline in front of you.
Really?
Yeah, it was
Yes.
incredibly disheartening.
Yes.
Really?
Because you're like, what's the point of any of the work that I'm putting out when I'm watching a program called Chartbeat? Do you guys use
Yeah.
Chartbeat?
No, we just look at analytics.
Okay, but there was like a program called Chartbeat
very
they were using
refreshing.
where it's just like how many people are clicking on your story, and they just kept declining.
Really?
Did you know at the time that the thing that was causing that was the actual platform itself, and it wasn't you?
Well, this is the thing.
Look,
it was
probably
often,
us. We're blaming the algorithms. It was probably us.
It was often put that, oh, well, Facebook has changed its algorithm. It'll change back.
Yep.
So it was always, if we had a dip in numbers, the messaging was often the algorithm.
Is this from up top?
Yeah.
From the bosses?
Yeah, often. Yeah. And eventually I think it got to the point where it's like, okay, the algorithm's never going to change back.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we're all screwed. We need to find new ways. And there were new ways that were put in when you have perhaps maybe like a reputation already, that's the kind of content you put out, the damage is done, and reputational
Yeah.
damage is almost impossible to undo. I think you can, but it would take years to actually.
I don't actually think that you can because there's too many competitors in the same space. But I think that's exactly it. It was the algorithm went, but it wasn't just the algorithm. The content went with it. And when the content went with it, the trust went with it too.
Yeah.
And there was just no coming back from
And
it.
do you think the algorithm and the platform's changed in an effort to stamp out clickbait?
Yes.
Yeah, that was.
I
that was the
genuinely
cause.
believe that. I genuinely believe that consumers were so cynical now about the media.
Yeah.
But also, I think media companies started to put aside a huge bunch of money in their budget to use Facebook advertising in order to boost their content back up. So there was like, it wasn't completely altruistic, but I do think it kind of did stamp out clickbait because I don't see many of the headlines that I used to see in my Facebook feed now.
Unless
Although-
someone
Because I don't see anything.
Although, but now, like in terms of what you get in terms of the algorithm, I think it'd be really hard now to build something from the ground up without actually having to pay.
If you want to use Facebook, I think you'd
play.
almost be screwed.
Groups are okay. I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys are part of any Facebook groups, but I think the Facebook group for us that we have built around the Shameless podcast community has been huge in fostering a sense of community
right.
that we wouldn't be able to on any other platform.
What are the followers called? Are they called shamers?
No, we don't have
Have you got a
them.
name?
People keep trying to come up with
I also
names.
think names are kind of lame. What do you
It
guys
sounds, I think
Morning
it's
shamers.
one
that
of them.
sticks.
One of the ones that someone put forward was Shameless Sites. There were like a whole
Oh,
bunch. I'm
yeah.
like, Shameless Sisters. I'm like, we're just not having a name. You're just
Shameless Sisters.
you're just women who listen to
Yeah,
you.
it's like let's like not do that.
Get it printed on merch or something.
But I think you need to build something elsewhere before you build that Facebook community. Like you can't just rely on that. Like you know how you used to be able to
Yeah.
build Facebook pages. I mean, you guys built yours. You had
Overnight,
like one of the
yeah.
biggest ones in the country. Like you used to be able to do that. You couldn't build anything from scratch on Facebook. But I still think with Facebook groups, it can like aid your growth so long as you're using other platforms too.
It was interesting talking about the bylines before with, you now have a digital footprint. If we
Yes.
scroll back a few
Please
years,
don't.
Oh my God, don't.
we'll find some red hot articles you've written. But
Red hot.
I was actually thinking that this last couple of weeks with, some big news stories, particularly about kids, and you look at these articles, you can tell that there've been editorial decisions from above these young journalists who've gone out. And there was one in particular, I can't remember what newspaper it was on, but it was like, we speak to some of the 300,000 people that went to the climate rally, and they were telling us that they just wanted to have Subway, and it was just a day off. And it was it's kind of not, well, that's not what a 22-year-old's thinking, but they've still got to have their name attached to
Yeah.
it. Like that is, it's almost similar to, those kids that get Instagram their whole life, and then they've got this digital footprint that they don't really feel
It's hard.
they have any control
It's
of.
really hard. I
Hmm.
used to try. I know we both used to try and pull our names off stories when we filed them, so you can because you can tell, right? You
Yeah.
look at news articles and it will be staff writer or
Yeah.
team,
Yeah.
and someone's pulled their byline off that very deliberately. I used to do that in every second article that I wrote. Sometimes I would see it published and my name had been put back on. And it is I'm not in like a woe is me mood. Like I chose to go into this industry and I picked the job that I wanted at the time. But
But
said,
they put your name back on it just to show that they had
yeah,
a writer that felt that way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard because
Roughly.
it's not just stories you're being handed. Sometimes you're handed opinion pieces where it's like,
Yeah.
hey, can you write this opinion? And it's very hard to push back when you're
That
21
was-
being like, this is not my fucking opinion.
That was the worst part. Honestly, that was the worst part. Some days I'd get into work. If I was doing night shifts, some days I would get into work and I'd have a message from the editor being like, okay, great, can you write this opinion piece? This is the opinion angle. And I'd be like, okay, great. That's not actually my opinion.
Yeah.
I feel nothing about this story. I don't know what to say about it that would be anything like, oh, we'll just think of an angle that works for you. I'm like, okay, I don't have one, but you'd have to come up with something.
Yeah.
And you'd have to almost be more hyperbolic about what you think and how you feel just to get the story out, because you'd only have maybe 90 minutes to write it, and then you need to get on to the next story. So you can't just waste a whole bunch of time because you're expected to file 4 to 5 stories every shift.
But I remember we would sit there and be like, okay, well, this is not the opinion I can write, but I need to find an opinion that's not that similar. And we would sit there and brainstorm all of the opinions about it. And it's like, well, which one is the most viable?
Is the most true.
Yeah.
Is the most... You could link it to me.
Yeah.
And we're making the industry sound terrible because nobody's going to trust journalists. Yeah. It wasn't always like this. I think we were in digital media at a very desperate time when these things did happen, but I don't think they do happen across the board.
Do you think there's a kind of etiquette developing? Was it balancing itself out a little bit? Because it was a sugar hit era just before these,
we were in the sugar hit era as well.
Yeah,
so
right.
We experienced it all.
You got to see people feeling like they were going to be rich forever.
Oh, yeah. Yes. We rode the high and we rode the low as well. And I definitely think from what I've heard from people who are still in that sphere, it's changing, which is great.
But I also think that people or readers know who to trust now.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's really a sense that people are wising up and getting smarter about the kinds of content that they trust. And I think that has a huge impact too. I think it makes news outlets be better because they don't really have a choice. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else do you guys, I mean, we've obviously kind of touched on a lot of your kind of format, but what else are you guys kind of outside of the batchy recaps?
Yeah.
What kind of other stuff would you say that Shameless kind of covers in your MO?
I'm trying to think of like the biggest segments that we've done. Often we will bring a segment into the podcast that we just care about and we think is interesting. We think if it's a big story in the media, if we think it should be a big story, then we'll cover it. Like, for example, we launched the first episode of this year was actually with a segment on the fact that Ultratune had used 3 men accused of domestic violence as their 3 faces of the brand. And so we did a whole segment on that. It was probably one of our biggest segments of the year. And you might look at that and be like, that's not really celebrity or pop culture, but it is pop culture because it's something that is in the culture that we should all be talking about and that people should know about. So sometimes we'll pluck something out of thin air where we're like, hang on, these 3 men have all been accused of either bashing women or raping them. Yeah. And those are the 3 men that are deemed what should be the faces of that brand.
Or even convicted.
Yeah. Well, I think one of them had been convicted. Yeah. The other 2 had been accused.
They were very weird ads, weren't they?
Yeah, super weird ads. So something like that we'll look at and be like, okay, we want to talk about this. It might not neatly fit into the whole celebrity thing, but I think our listeners trust us enough now over the last 18 months that we can take the conversation there without it being questioned. They understand why we do that.
But pop culture is also a pretty broad term. Like, you can define it how you want. I think often the things that we think about is like, what is trending at the moment? And I don't mean like Twitter trending, but what are people talking about? What are people feeling? And I think that's a pretty easy way to tap into conversations. Like, we might just read an article that really taps into a mood and we brand that as pop culture because we think that is something that a lot of young people are feeling. I mean, we did a segment a couple of weeks ago that was on like the pressure to be really successful really young, and that is not celebrity or pop culture by any stretch, but it was an article, like the most read article on a really popular US website. And we thought if that's really tapping into the mood, then our podcast should be the mood and pop culture is the mood. So it's kind of an easy umbrella.
It's like the zeitgeist. It's an annoying buzzword, but the zeitgeist is really it, right?
Yeah.
Well, where do you draw the line with pop culture is another question. Like, obviously there's been plenty of sports figures that have just gone into that world. Warney, I guess you could say, is kind of in that world.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was Beck and Hewitt.
Beck and Leighton.
They were big time.
Yeah.
That was yesteryear. That's like Gen X royalty. Where do you draw the lines? Does it feel like Australia has a celebrity deficit? Because we think about that. You look at America and they've got Kardashians and they've got, even for whatever you think these people stand for, they exist there as popular socialites or whatever, they're celebrities. Yeah. And Australia, we kind of got caught up in Barnaby Joyce and Vicky for about 18 months.
But that's the thing.
I think that this country just loves to have a temporary celebrity where, they enjoy them for 5 minutes and then they never want to hear from them again.
It's reality. It's like either reality stars who we make celebrities like Ines from Married at First Sight, or it's media personalities like Carrie Bickmore, Waleed Ali would be some of the biggest celebrities in Australia, but they're not like celebrities. They're more
it's almost like the minute a journalist takes a job on primetime television, whether it be morning TV or something like The Project, they become our quote-unquote celebrities. I do think we have like a complete celebrity deficit and our bar for celebrity is pretty low, but I don't think we have many others. Yeah. And I think it makes our job way easier because we can define anyone who is well known as a celebrity. Like, I'm sure we probably did something on the Barnaby Joyce saga when it all happened, because it does transcend politics. Like, it's not about politics anymore.
Yeah.
It's about the media. And if it's in the media and people are talking about it and it's making headlines and those headlines are interesting, then we will talk about it.
We'll also talk about US celebrities as well. We kind of do just kind of borrow celebrities from the US and the UK when we're strapped on segments, for sure.
How do you feel about the changing media landscape globally? From that tabloid era, there was a good understanding of what would interest Australian audiences. But now that it's like the Wild West out there with the internet, particularly. You've got K-pop and things like this that the kids are into, and it's kind of hard to navigate around just the severe globalization of media.
Well, I don't know if we're the best people to ask, because we're struggling with TikTok majorly.
Yeah.
Like, I keep looking at that app and being like, okay, I'm missing something, and all the young kids are into it, and I'm not a young kid anymore.
I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing, particularly if we're talking about news media, because I think like sites in the US have like way more money than we have in Australia. And I think there's far more quality journalism overseas than there is in Australia. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That said, it's pretty sad when young kids aren't being exposed to like local newspapers or local mediums, and they don't have that sense of connection. Like, they need to find that local sense of connection somewhere else, and I think that can breed probably a lot of loneliness if we're going so far out of our way to consume media. But I don't think it's all bad or all doom and gloom. I just think we need to fill the holes here somewhere else. And I think Australian podcasting is very strong. Like, not to plug our own business model, but I do think Australian podcasting is really strong, and I think that's what fills the void when traditional media is dying in Australia and people are going elsewhere.
Yeah, it's an interesting, it's almost like a result of the streaming kind of culture with media now, because commercial TV for years had rules where it was you need this much Australian content coming out, and that was what limited, that's why people grew up with Neighbours and they grew up with A Current Affair or whatever. There was so much stuff you needed to see. And nowadays, it really is Netflix. If they wanted to make that decision, it wouldn't affect their business model to not have one bit of Australian content on it. And there have been talk of laws changing, but do you feel like that's kind of helped you guys? You guys have kind of filled or found a void anyway.
Well, we have had to make a huge effort to make sure that we are leveraging the niche that we found, which is local Australian content. Like, as tempting as it is to talk about the Kardashians every day, it's like, that's service. Like, we need to talk about the Australian influencers who have less influence and less followings, but are local, and nobody else is going to talk about them. Like, from a pragmatic point of view, that's really, really important to us.
Yeah, I remember last year we met with a network. This was kind of like in a time when we were figuring out what the hell to do and how to monetize what Shameless is. And we were approached by a few networks, and this one network was like, okay, we need to get you guys in front of a US audience or a UK audience. You need to pick, and we need to make sure that we are talking about content that's relevant to them. Way bigger markets than Australia. You shouldn't even really bother with Australia. Make sure it's always tailored to them. And I remember sitting there being like, this person has no fucking clue what we're doing. Like, they just don't get it. And that's fine. They don't have to get it. But if that's their suggestion, then it's way off mark, because this is the gap. And if you try and go, like, you always see media companies, Australian media companies, try and go into the US and expand, and it's tricky. Like, that's such a saturated market already. So it's kind of nice to have our little Australian niche.
There's so much else that people can get from overseas, particularly in women's media. Women's media is not as strong here as it is overseas, particularly in the US. The UK, it's struggling a bit now too. But, like, this is our niche. And we would be such bad business people to ignore that and to try and go bigger. Like, yes, our ceiling might be a little smaller because it's Australia, but that's perfect because we wouldn't have a ceiling if we went elsewhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't have business.
So there's no chance of like a Shameless LA, Shameless Latino language, Shameless.
Someone's going to play this interview back in 10 years, like you said, and we're going to say all these things are going to be wrong.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Zara and Michelle. We've got to get a flight up north, so we better get moving. But thank you for coming on. It was great to learn about the wild world of Shameless and the wild west of influencers.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
It was great to learn about women.
You're so welcome. What a public service.